The whisper caught him mid-stride. Alec Renault had not planned to stop. He was late for a call with his board in Toronto, carrying a rolled set of architectural drawings under one arm, and a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, moving through the main entrance of Halifax General Hospital with the focused efficiency of a man who had long ago stopped noticing other people's crises. Then a hand grabbed his sleeve. "Please." The woman's voice was barely audible. "Please don't tell my mother I'm not seeing anyone." He stopped. She was pressed against the wall beside the automatic doors, half hidden behind a concrete pillar, watching a wheelchair being pushed toward them from across the lobby. The woman in the wheelchair was small and white-haired, wrapped in a hospital blanket despite the July warmth, holding a paper cup of something warm with both hands. A nurse walked alongside, chatting cheerfully about nothing in particular. The woman gripping Alec's sleeve looked as though she hadn't slept in several days. "I'm sorry," he said. "My mother." She glanced toward the approaching wheelchair, then back at him. Her eyes were dark and direct, and very close to panicked. "She just finished 6 weeks of treatment. She's been worried sick. About me, about everything. She kept asking if I was seeing anyone, and I said yes because I didn't want her to. I just said yes. And now she's about to walk through those doors and I have no one and you're—" She stopped, drew a breath. "You look like someone who isn't going to make a scene." Alec looked at her. Then at the woman in the wheelchair, now close enough that he could see the brightness in her eyes, the way she was already scanning the lobby with unmistakable anticipation. "You told her you had a boyfriend," he said. "I told her his name was Mark." "My name isn't Mark." "I know that." She tightened her grip on his sleeve. "Please, just 10 minutes, just until she's settled in the car. That's all I need." He had every sensible reason to say no. He said, "What's her name?" "Lorraine Boudreau." He shifted the rolled drawings under his arm, picked up his cold coffee, and walked toward the wheelchair. Lorraine Boudreau looked up at him, the way people only look at someone they've been hoping to meet for a long time. "Mark," she said warmly, "I've heard so much about you." Behind him, Alec heard a very quiet, very controlled exhale. "Mrs. Boudreau." He shook her hand. "It's good to finally put a face to the name." The nurse smiled at the three of them and went back inside. Lorraine studied him with the calm scrutiny of a woman who had spent decades reading people. "You have kind eyes," she said at last. "My daughter said you were tall." She was modest about the rest. Alec glanced sideways at Elise Boudreau, whose expression suggested she was reconsidering every decision she had made in the last 5 minutes. "I'll get the car," Elise said. "I'll help with your bag," Alec said to Lorraine, and picked up the small duffel beside the wheelchair without waiting to be asked. He told himself 10 minutes was nothing. He had sat through 4-hour budget meetings. He had once negotiated a commercial lease for 11 consecutive hours without leaving the table. 10 minutes with a kind elderly woman outside a hospital was manageable. He was wrong about the 10 minutes. The drive to Lorraine's house in the South End took 25 minutes, largely because Lorraine asked questions the entire way, and Alec, seated in the back beside her while Elise drove, found himself actually answering them. What did he do for a living? Where had he grown up? Whether he preferred the city or the coast. He told her he ran a development firm, that he'd been born in Moncton and moved to Halifax for university and never quite left, that he preferred the coast, specifically that particular stretch of the Northwest Arm where the light came off the water in the late afternoon. Elise used to paint that stretch, Lorraine said, when she was at NSCAD. "Mom," Elise said from the front seat. She was very good. "I was fine." She won a prize. It was a regional competition. She has 3 canvases under her bed she hasn't touched in 4 years. The car went quiet. In the rearview mirror, Alec could see the faint set of Elise's jaw and chose not to say anything at all. Lorraine's house was a narrow Victorian on a tree-lined street, the kind of house that had been repainted many times over many decades and had somehow absorbed every color into something that now just looked like itself. Inside, it smelled like cedar and old books and something that might have been cardamom. "Sit," Lorraine instructed, pointing at the kitchen table with the authority of someone who had never once had to make the same request twice. "I'll make tea." "You're supposed to rest," Elise said. "I've been resting for 6 weeks. I am full to the brim with rest." Lorraine was already filling the kettle. Alec pulled out a chair, He noticed the shelf of framed photographs along the far wall. Elise at various ages, a younger Lorraine beside a man with a beard and a wide, easy laugh, a few small landscapes that were clearly amateur work but had something careful and true in them. "Those are mine," Elise said quietly from beside him. She had followed his gaze from second year. He looked closer. They were good, not fine, good. "Why did you stop?" She picked up a dish towel and began folding it in thirds for no reason. Life, work, the usual reasons that aren't really reasons. "What do you do now?" "I run a heritage property consultancy." A pause, which sounds very dull when I say it out loud. Does it feel dull? She considered this, no, but it's harder to explain at parties. Lorraine set 3 mismatched mugs on the table and lowered herself into the chair at the head, with the slow care of someone who had learned to pay attention to her own body. She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at Alec with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Mark," she said, "how did you two meet?" He opened his mouth. "A conference," Elise said. "A pub," Alex said at the exact same moment. Silence. Lorraine's eyes moved between them. "A conference," Alex said, recovering, "that was held at a pub. Sort of. It was a networking event, not a formal, it was very casual." "Heritage development," Elise added, which made no particular sense, but Lorraine nodded as though it did. "I always thought the best things happened somewhere between formal and casual," Lorraine said, and smiled into her mug. Alec caught Elise's eye across the table. She mouthed sorry. He mouthed don't do that again. She pressed her lips together. The 10 minutes had become nearly 3 hours by the time Alec finally stood to leave. He had eaten a bowl of soup he hadn't expected, helped Elise move a bookcase in the hall that had been listing to the left for what Lorraine described as a geological period, and lost badly at a card game he didn't know called Rummy 500. While Lorraine narrated every mistake he made with the cheerful precision of a sports commentator. At the door, Lorraine took his hand in both of hers. "Come back," she said simply, as though it were not a question. Driving back to his office along Barrington Street, with the summer light going amber through the windshield, Alec tried to locate the exact moment he had agreed to any of this. He couldn't find it. He had simply stayed, the way water finds its level without deciding to. He was fairly certain the whole thing was finished now. Life again had other plans. He appeared at Lorraine's door the following Saturday carrying a bag of groceries, which surprised him as much as anyone. He had been driving past a market on Quinpool Road and found himself thinking about the slant of that bookcase and whether the floor beneath it was level or the wall itself. A structural question, purely professional. The bookcase, it turned out, was fine. The back step was not. 2 boards had softened with moisture and flexed under any real weight, and Elise had been stepping around them for so long she'd stopped seeing them entirely. "You're going to go through that one day," he said, crouching to examine the boards. Elise stood behind him with her arms crossed. "I was planning to get someone in." "When?" "Eventually." "Elise, this one's nearly through." "I've been busy." He looked up at her. She had paint on her left wrist, a smear of ochre, and didn't appear to know it was there. "Do you have a pry bar?" "I don't know what that is." "Of course you don't." He stood. "Hardware stores on Roby. Give me 20 minutes. "You don't have to." "I know." He was gone before she could finish the sentence. He came back with the tools and the boards and spent the better part of the afternoon on his knees in the sun, while Elise handed him things, with varying degrees of usefulness. She gave him the wrong screws twice, handed him a level when he'd asked for a pencil, and at one point appeared from inside the house carrying a glass of water and the unnecessary information that the CBC was reporting rain for Sunday. "I can see it's not raining," he said. "I'm being informative." "You're being supervisory." "I'm your assistant." "My assistant knows what a pry bar is." She crouched beside him with the glass of water. Her expression was something between defensive and amused, which he was beginning to recognize as her default setting. "For what it's worth," she said, "you're very good at this." He took the water. "I spent summers in construction before I started the firm. My uncle had a crew in Dartmouth." "So this isn't just benevolent interference." "It's completely benevolent. I just know what I'm doing." She laughed. Not the polite kind, the kind that happened before she could decide whether to let it. From the kitchen window, Lorraine watched them without moving. She had been watching for a while. There was something in the way they sat beside each other, without needing to fill every silence. Something in the way his hand steadied the board, and she steadied the tool without being asked. She knew what she was looking at. She had looked at it once herself, a long time ago. She went back to her crossword and did not interrupt. Lorraine's follow-up appointment 3 weeks later was at the QE2 Health Sciences Center on Summer Street, and Elise had asked Alec in a text that was very casual in its phrasing whether he happened to be in that part of the city that afternoon. He happened to be. He met them in the lobby and drove them home after, and somewhere in the month that followed he became a regular presence on Lorraine's street without anyone explicitly arranging it. He fixed the latch on the back gate. He came for dinner on Thursdays. He drove Lorraine to her physiotherapy appointment when Elise's work ran long, and remembered which waiting room had the better chairs and which coffee machine in the hospital actually worked. He also learned that Elise talked too much when she was nervous and went entirely still when she was frightened, that she hated being thanked for anything she considered ordinary, and that she had strong opinions about the route from the South End to the Hydrostone that she would defend under any circumstances, including being provably wrong. "Roby is faster," she said one afternoon. "Roby has 3 school zones before 4 o'clock. The back way has that light at Young that never changes. It changed last week, they recalibrated it. Since when do you know traffic light schedules?" "Since I started driving your mother to appointments." She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression that she covered quickly by turning to the window. He noticed. He had been noticing things like that for several weeks and choosing not to examine them too closely, the way you avoid pressing a bruise to confirm it still hurts. In the evening sometimes the 3 of them sat on Lorraine's back porch overlooking the garden while the neighborhood sounds settled around them. Lorraine would knit something she described as a dishcloth, but which bore no resemblance to any dishcloth Alec had seen. He would have his phone out or not. Elise would have a book open that she wasn't quite reading either. One night Lorraine said without looking up from her knitting, "I looked you up, you know. Renault Development." Alec felt something tighten. "Mom," Elise said. "He built the Olin Street conversion. I walked past it every week when I was on the neighborhood committee. I always wondered who did that work. They kept the original brickwork on the east face." She glanced up at him. "That was yours." It paused. "I argued for it. It nearly killed the budget." "Worth it." She looked back at her knitting. The city doesn't always know what it has until someone stops it from tearing things down. He said nothing. Elise had closed her book entirely and was looking at her mother with an expression Alec couldn't read from where he was sitting, but it made something settle in his chest that he didn't try to explain. He hadn't talked about his work like that, like it meant something, in longer than he could remember. He had been careful, after the divorce, not to need things to mean too much. His ex-wife had told him, near the end, that the problem was not that he was unkind. The problem was that he was always halfway somewhere else. She wasn't wrong. He had known she wasn't wrong, even as he'd listened to her say it across the kitchen table of their apartment on Agricola Street. He had nodded and felt, beneath all of it, a dull grief he hadn't found the bottom of yet. That was 2 years ago. He had not talked about it with anyone except his brother in Moncton, once, in a phone call that lasted 8 minutes and resolved nothing. One Thursday evening in August, Lorraine had gone inside to take her medication, and Alec and Elise sat alone on the porch in the cooling dark. The street lamp at the corner of the alley had come on. A neighbor's cat made its rounds along the fence. "Can I ask you something?" Elise said. "Probably." "Why are you still here?" He thought about it. Not the version of the answer that was easy, but the real one. "Your mother makes me feel like the brickwork is worth keeping," he said finally. Elise was quiet for a long time. Then, "She does that." "Does she do it with everyone?" A pause. "She's doing it with you specifically." He looked at her. She was looking at the garden, at some middle distance where the light didn't quite reach, and her profile in the lamplight was serious and unguarded, in a way it rarely was when she knew he was paying attention. He thought of several things he might say. He said none of them. Then Lauren came back through the screen door with 3 mugs and announced that the weather report was calling for a beautiful weekend and that she intended to go to the farmer's market and required both of them to come and carry things. Neither of them argued. The farmer's market on Saturday was warm and crowded and smelled like bread and basil, and Lorraine moved through it at her own unhurried pace, while Alec carried a canvas bag that grew steadily heavier, and Elise made executive decisions about cheese with the focused intensity she brought to everything. A vendor near the back offered samples from a small platter. Lorraine accepted immediately. "Wedding cake?" Elise read the hand-lettered sign. "We make it year-round," the vendor said with a cheerful shrug. "You two celebrating anything?" Lorraine had already drifted 2 stalls over and was examining a display of local honey. "Just passing through," Elise said. The vendor smiled. "That's usually how it starts." They found Lorraine inspecting a jar of wildflower honey with the seriousness of a jeweler examining a stone. She didn't look up when they rejoined her. "The couple at the end seemed nice," she said. "They were selling cake," Elise said. "I know." Lorraine held the jar to the light. "Did you try a piece?" "Mom." "It's rude to refuse samples." Alec said nothing. He caught Elise's eye. She looked away first. Walking back to the car, with Lorraine a few steps ahead pointing out a rose garden she intended to revisit in September, Elise fell into step beside him and lowered her voice. "She's going to try to make this into something." "I think she's been trying since the hospital," he said. Elise stopped walking. He went 2 steps further before he realized and turned back. She was standing in the middle of the market path with her canvas bag and her serious expression, and something in her face had gone quiet in the way it did when she was actually afraid. "I don't know what this is," she said. "I want you to know that I know it started as something I had no right to ask of you, and I've appreciated that you stayed, but I don't want you to feel like you have to keep." "Elise." She stopped. "I know what this started as," he said, "and I know what it is now. Those are different things." She looked at him. "They're different things," he said again, more quietly. Lorraine, from 20 feet ahead, called back, "The car is the other direction." Alec turned. Elise exhaled. They walked. Lorraine's 3rd follow-up, in September, was supposed to be routine. A blood draw, a review of her numbers, the usual reassurances. Elise drove. Alec met them afterward. He was waiting in the lobby when Elise came through the double doors alone, moving quickly and too quietly. Her face told him before she did. "Her blood pressure dropped," she said. "They're keeping her for observation. They said it's precautionary. But they said that and then they took her through those doors and I can't." She stopped, pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. She was laughing at something the nurse said, and then she wasn't standing anymore. Alec crossed the lobby and she didn't step back. He didn't tell her it would be fine. He didn't know that. He put his hand against the back of her head, gently, and she leaned her forehead against his shoulder, and he stayed very still while she tried to remember how to breathe. They sat for 2 hours outside the observation ward. He got her a coffee she didn't drink. She got him one he didn't drink either. They sat with their chairs turned slightly toward each other, and somewhere in the 2nd hour, without either of them quite deciding, her hand found his on the armrest. When Dr. Nkemdirim came out to say that Lorraine was stable, that her medication had been adjusted, that she could go home the following morning, Elise's whole body exhaled. Alec felt it through their joined hands. He didn't let go. She didn't either. The following evening, Lorraine sat in her kitchen eating soup and giving Alec a detailed critique of the hospital food, while Elise stood at the window with her mug, not saying much. She had been quieter than usual since the night before. Not frightened anymore, something more thoughtful than frightened. "She worries too much," Lorraine said to Alec, in the voice people use when they intend the subject to hear them. "She has worried about me since she was 7 years old. When her father died, she decided she had to worry enough for both of us." She lifted another spoonful of soup. "It is a very heavy thing to carry alone." Elise set down her mug. "I'm right here, Mom." "I know." Lorraine smiled at her, then at him. "So is he." Alec looked at Elise across the kitchen. She looked back. Neither of them argued. A week later, Lorraine set a small wooden box on the kitchen table between them and sat down across from it, with the particular stillness of someone who has chosen their moment carefully. "This was yours," Elise said. "It still is." Lorraine opened the box. Inside, on a fold of blue cloth, rested a narrow silver bracelet set with 3 flat labradorite stones catching the kitchen light in flashes of blue and green. "I wore it the night I met your father, the night I knew." Alec started to stand Mrs. Boudreau. "I'm not giving it away." Lorraine looked at him with those clear, patient eyes. "I'm asking you to keep it here, in this house." She glanced at the bracelet. "It should be somewhere there's something worth watching over." Elise said nothing for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and closed the box herself gently, and passed it to Alec. He held it with both hands. "I'll take care of it," he said. Lorraine nodded once, satisfied, and changed the subject to the rose garden she wanted to see before October, and the rest of the evening was ordinary and warm. The bracelet sat on the windowsill in his home office for 3 months. He looked at it sometimes during early morning calls. He thought about the way Lorraine had said it should be where there's something worth watching over. He thought about 3 canvases under a bed in the South End, an ochre on a wrist in July sunlight, and a hand on an armrest in a hospital corridor with terrible fluorescent light and bad coffee. His firm won a major contract in February, the full restoration of a heritage building in downtown Vancouver. A year's work, minimum, a significant team, the kind of project he had been building toward for a decade. He called his operations director before he told anyone else. Then he sat for a long time looking at his phone. He told Elise on a Thursday. They were at Lorraine's as usual after dinner, with Lorraine's increasingly improbable dishcloth growing in her lap. He said it plainly, "Vancouver, 1 year, possibly longer. Good work, real work." Lorraine did not look surprised. She looked at him the way she had looked at the Oland Street brickwork, like she was already calculating what it was made of. "When?" Elise asked. "March." She nodded. She did not ask him not to go. He noticed that, and noticed also what it cost her not to. That night at the door, Lorraine pressed the wooden box into his hands. "Take it," she said. "I'll come back for it," he said. "Take it with you." She folded his fingers around it. "My husband used to say that the things we carry are just our reasons made solid." She stepped back. "Come back when you're ready. Not before." He left in March. The drive to the airport was early and gray, fog sitting low over the arm. He had said his goodbyes the night before. He did not let himself stop. He was checking his bags when he heard his name. Turned. Elise was walking quickly toward him through the terminal, her coat half-buttoned, carrying a paper bag. She was not running, he would learn, she would later insist, because running in airports was undignified, and she was a professional. She was clearly out of breath. "I brought you food," she said. "You forget to eat when you're in transit." He looked at the bag. "You drove to the airport at 6 in the morning to bring me food." "I was already up." "Elise, there are oatcakes and that cheddar from the market you liked." She pushed the bag into his hands, "and a jar of honey, for no specific reason." He looked at the bag, then at her. "I didn't say everything I should have said," she told him. "I'm not going to say it all now because you have a flight, and I don't do things like this. I am very much not a person who does things like this." She stopped. "But I wanted you to know that the last 9 months were not nothing. They weren't some accident I stumbled into outside a hospital. I know they weren't the same for you as—" "Elise." She stopped. He put the bag down on the handle of his suitcase. He held her face in both hands and felt her stop bracing for something. "They were exactly the same for me," he said. She blinked. "I just needed you to go first," he said, "because I'm a coward with good organizational skills." She laughed, the real kind, the kind she couldn't stop, and he pulled her into him and held on with his arms around her shoulders and her forehead against his jaw and all the terrible airport noise around them that neither of them heard. He went to Vancouver, he called, almost every evening. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes just to show her the view from his apartment, because the harbor there reminded him of something he couldn't name until she pointed out it looked like the Northwest Arm in different light. In November, Lorraine's doctor used the word remission. Elise sent him a photo of the 2 of them at the kitchen table, with mismatched mugs and the expression of people who have been trying not to hope too hard and are now allowed to hope as much as they like. He looked at the photo for a long time, then he called his operations director. The contract had one final phase that could be managed remotely. He was on a flight back to Halifax in December. He did not tell Elise he was coming. He had a reason for that, which was that he wanted to be standing somewhere specific when he saw her again, and he wanted to arrive there on his own. He took a cab from the airport to Lorraine Street. He stood on the pavement outside the house with his suitcase and the wooden box in his coat pocket, and the harbor cold and gray and familiar behind the rooftops. Elise came out the front door at 4:17 in the afternoon, carrying her work bag and not looking up from her phone. She looked up. He raised his hand in the approximate gesture of a person who is trying to appear more casual than they are. She stood on the front step for a moment. Then she came down the 3 steps to the path and crossed the small yard and stopped 2 feet away from him. The Vancouver contract is being managed remotely. You said a year. I said I'd come back when I was ready. She looked at him. Are you ready? He took the box from his coat pocket and held it out, open. Inside, the Labradorite caught the December light, gray and green and the particular blue of the arm on a clear afternoon. Your mother said it belongs where there's something worth watching over, he said. Elise looked at the bracelet, then at him. She's going to be insufferable about this, she said. I know. She's going to tell everyone she planned it. She did plan it. Elise laughed, the kind of laugh that carries no armor in it at all. She took the bracelet from the box and held it for a moment, then looked up at him with her dark, direct eyes in the December cold. Come inside, she said. She made soup. He picked up his suitcase. She went up the 3 steps ahead of him and held the door. He crossed the yard thinking of nothing in particular. Not the year behind him or the year ahead. Not contracts or board calls or the distance between coasts. Just the light through the front window. The smell of cardamom. The sound of Lorraine calling out from somewhere inside that she'd heard the door, and was anyone going to tell her what was happening, or did she have to come out there herself? He stepped inside. Some things don't arrive with an announcement. They arrive the way good brickwork holds, quietly, without fanfare, built to last precisely because no one rushed the foundation. And sometimes the most important decision you make is the one you didn't plan on, choosing to stay for 10 minutes, and discovering that 10 minutes was just the beginning of something you didn't have a name for yet, but felt, in every ordinary moment after, like coming home.